Is buy-to-let dead? You keep on hearing that it doesn't work anymore, but is that true? Well, through our Sunday Times column and the thousands of investors that we've worked with directly, we've seen property from just about every angle. And I can tell you, it's not quite as black and white as that. So let's take a look at why people think buy-to-let is dead, the situations in which they're actually right, and what you need to do differently if you want it to work for you in 2025. So, to work out whether buy-to-let is dead in 2025, we first need to look at why people think this way. And one of the most common reasons is to do with profit, or rather, a lack of it. On the face of it, if you're charging a high rent, it might seem like you're sure to make a profit. But actually, it's more about how much you keep. I heard from a new landlord, Steve, who was feeling pretty pleased with himself. He'd just rented out his 2-bedroom flat for £1,800 a month, which, after budgeting for all his costs, he believed would make him a £300 monthly profit. But Steve made a big mistake. He bought the flat in his own name. He didn't think twice about it and wanted to keep things simple. And when his tax return came around, Steve was in for a nasty shock. Because he's a higher rate taxpayer, HMRC treated all of his mortgage interest as if it was profit. That bumped up his taxable income, even though that money never hit his bank account. He could claim a 20% tax credit, but he was still paying tax at 40% on not just his actual profit, but also the extra profit he never really earned. By the time he'd run the post-tax numbers, he was making a loss every single month. Now compare Steve to Adam, an investor who's been in the game for years. Adam also has a flat that rents for £1,800 a month, but instead of owning it in his own name, he bought it through a limited company. That means his company can deduct the full cost of the mortgage interest, just like any normal business would deduct its expenses. So his profits reflect what he actually keeps after costs, not some inflated number on paper. And he pays corporation tax on those profits at a far lower rate than the 40% that Steve is stuck with. Sure, if he wants to take the money out of the company to spend personally, he'll pay a hefty dividend tax too. But here's the key difference. He's in control. He can choose when and how much to draw. He can let the profits build up inside the company. And crucially, he's not being taxed on income he never received. So while Steve has decided that buy-to-let is dead, all because of his tax bill, Adam is making a steady and reliable profit with the help of his company. So what can you do? Most of the investors we work with use limited companies for exactly this reason. It's not a magic fix for everyone. If you inherited a property or you're renting out your old home, the expense of transferring it into a company will often outweigh the gains. And drawing money from the company does come with tax implications of its own, so it won't be right for you if you want to get your hands on the money to spend. Still, if you're starting from scratch or you're planning to grow your portfolio, your chosen structure can make or break your profits, no matter how high the rent is. This is more important than ever in 2025, which is why we've created a free guide to help you figure out which tax structure is right for you and potentially save tens of thousands of pounds. You can click the link in the description to download it. That said, tax isn't the only silent profit killer. Another reason people say buy-to-let is dead has something to do with borrowing costs. Between 2009 and 2021, the Bank of England base rate didn't go above 1%. At one point, it was just 0.1%. Landlords could lock in 5-year mortgage deals at 2%, sometimes even lower. It got to the point where borrowing felt practically free, especially when rents kept creeping up at the same time. For many investors, it was a golden era. Mortgage payments were low, profits were strong, and the whole thing felt almost too good to be true. And now, like Blockbuster, Woolworths, and MSN Messenger, our beloved low interest rates are gone. Take landlord Sarah, for example. She bought a terraced house in 2019 and locked in a 5-year fixed-rate mortgage at 1.89%. The rent covered everything, with £300 left over each month. She was happy, her tenant was happy, and life was good. Fast forward to today. Her fix has ended, and the best deal she can find now is over 5%. Her mortgage payments have more than doubled, and the few £100 she had left over each month, it's gone, replaced by a shortfall that she now has to cover from her own pocket. It's not just Sarah this is happening to. Every month, more landlords are coming off low-rate fixes and finding that the numbers just don't work anymore. Some are trying to raise the rent to cover the gap. But with affordability already stretched, there's only so far you can push it. Others are trying to ride it out, hoping rates come back down. But in the meantime, they're losing money every month. And if you've got multiple properties, those losses stack up fast. That said, rising interest rates haven't hit everyone equally. If you bought your property years ago and didn't remortgage to pull out equity, chances are your rent has risen by more than your costs. So while your profits may have shrunk, you're probably still in the black. But if you bought between, say, 2020 and 2022, or you bought earlier and have remortgaged aggressively, then you're far more exposed. And if you bought in areas like London or Oxford, where rental yields are low and capital growth was always the main goal, then you're especially vulnerable. Because when your mortgage rate is higher than your yield, the maths just doesn't work. Sadly, there's no quick fix to dodge high interest rates, although they are expected to come down in the coming years. But at least if you're buying today, you know from the start what you'll be paying, and you can make sure you only buy where the numbers make sense. Now let's move on to the third reason people think buy-to-let is dead. This one is every landlord's worst nightmare. Imagine this. You've got a tenant who hasn't paid rent for 3 months. You've sent polite reminders. You've tried to be understanding, but your mortgage still needs paying and your patience is running out. You ask them to leave, but rather than go through the courts and trying to prove a breach, which could drag on for months, you issue a Section 21 no-fault notice. You don't give a reason because you don't have to. As long as you follow the process correctly, the courts can't turn you down. You'll probably never get that lost rent back, but at least you can move on and find a new tenant. That's how things used to work. But it's about to get a lot harder for landlords to get rid of bad tenants. When the Renters' Rights Bill becomes law, probably later this year, Section 21 will be scrapped, and landlords will only be able to evict their tenants if they can prove a specific reason under Section 8. Reasons might include needing to sell the property, wanting to move in yourself or move in a close family member, serious rent arrears, antisocial behaviour, and repeated breaches of the tenancy agreement. But even with valid grounds like these, you'll need to go through the courts, and there's no guarantee it'll be quick or easy. To make matters worse, that's not the only change landlords are dealing with. There's also higher stamp duty when buying an investment property, mandatory energy performance upgrades, local licensing schemes with extra rules and costs depending on where you buy. And in some areas, like Scotland, there are rent caps and temporary eviction bans. So it's no surprise that many landlords are choosing to sell up, especially those with just 1 or 2 properties. To them, buy-to-let does feel dead. But is it? Well, to work out whether buy-to-let is really dead for you, we need to keep an eye out for the red flags, the warning signs that it might not work. Let's go back to our friend Steve, still licking his wounds from that unexpected tax bill. He'd bought his flat thinking it would supplement his income. Something steady and low effort to top up his monthly cash flow. The rent was decent, but by the time the bills, a few minor repairs, and above all the tax had come out of his bank account, he was actually losing money each month. Now, to be fair, he might still benefit from capital growth over the long term, but right now, the property is taking cash out of his pocket, not putting it in. And it's hard to call something an investment when it's leaving you worse off every month. But here's the thing, 20 or even 10 years ago, you could buy an investment property and start seeing extra money in your personal bank account the following month. But that's no longer the case in 2025. If you're expecting a payout from day one, then yes, buy-to-let is dead. You're only going to be disappointed because taking the rent to live off means either owning the property personally or withdrawing profit from your company, both of which have nasty tax consequences. Where it does work is if you're playing the long game. Most people fixate on the monthly profit a property makes, but as we've seen, the monthly profit isn't something you can do much with in practice anyway. Instead, we focus on the total return, a combination of long-term capital growth and rental income, even if you don't touch that rental income for years. Here's what that looks like in practice. Let's say you put in 1/3 of the total cost of buying a property, which covers your deposit, stamp duty, and legal fees, and you use a mortgage for the rest. If the property grows in value by just 3%, that's a 9% return on your investment, thanks to the power of leverage. Then there's the rental income on top, which instead of drawing out, you leave inside the company to build up. Year by year, your equity increases and your rental profits compound. It might not look like much in the early years, but over time, the results can be really impressive, even if there's no property boom and you just see slow and steady growth. Eventually, when you stop working or reduce your other income, you can withdraw money out of the company in a more tax-efficient way, or you can sell the properties, or you can pass the business on to your children. So no, buy-to-let won't work as a quick win. But if you're patient and you treat it like a long-term wealth-building plan, that's when it really starts to pay off. This next situation is one that a lot of people watching will have already found themselves in. Let's imagine you bought your first flat in your 20s and it was the perfect bachelor pad. But now you've met someone or you've got a child on the way and you're looking for a bit more space. You're loath to let your flat go though. As well as the emotional attachment, you've penciled the numbers and found that it will leave you with a nice bit of extra monthly income. So if you have the deposit to buy your new home and keep the flat, why not? You don't want to be some kind of tycoon, but having that extra income and an asset that will grow in an area you know well, that's just smart. Except that doesn't work anymore. First, there's the stamp duty, which increased even further recently for those buying an additional property. So now, because of that flat, you'll pay a 5% surcharge on the purchase of your new home, potentially adding tens of thousands to your moving costs. If you're a higher rate taxpayer, you'll also be taxed on the rental income without being able to deduct your full mortgage interest. That can push your effective tax rate even higher, and maybe even bump you into a band where you lose your personal allowance or childcare support. And what if you're in a slightly different but equally common scenario? You've inherited a property. Well, then you'll still have the extra stamp duty to pay if you haven't bought your own home yet, and the same nasty tax situation. And to make matters worse, you're now running a rental business, even though you never intended to. And that means keeping up with safety checks, tenancy deposit rules, repair obligations, EPC ratings, and local licensing laws which vary from one council to the next. If your tenant stops paying, you're still on the hook for the mortgage, the service charge, and the repairs, all while potentially waiting months to regain possession. In theory, you could reduce your tax bill by putting the property in a company, like I mentioned earlier, but transferring it across triggers more stamp duty, legal fees, and in some cases, capital gains tax. And if you've only got that one property, well, you're stuck with all the costs and admin of being a landlord without the income or scale to make it worthwhile. That's why, in most cases, buy-to-let just doesn't work for amateur or accidental landlords. You're exposed to all the risk without the plan, the scale, or the structure to turn it into a real business. If you ask me, you need to be planning to eventually buy 4 or more properties over time for it to really be worth it. But is this really the final nail in the buy-to-let coffin? To figure this out once and for all, let's say you've got your eye on a buy-to-let in London. You know the area well, have been to a couple of viewings, found a nice 2-bed flat that seems like a safe bet, and you've even lined up a letting agent. But when you plug the numbers into the Property Hub spreadsheet, link in the description, nothing works. It just doesn't make sense to invest. The rent barely covers the mortgage. And once you cover maintenance, insurance, and agency fees, you're looking at a loss every single month. There's nothing wrong with you or our spreadsheet. The problem is the postcode. In some parts of the country, especially in the south, the maths just isn't adding up anymore. Rental yields in places like London and the southeast are often between 2.5% and 4.5%, which is virtually impossible to make a profit on with today's mortgage rates. The outlook for capital growth in these parts of the country isn't much better. Savills forecasts 5-year growth of 17.1% for London and 17.6% for the southeast. And looking at these numbers, I can see why so many people think buy-to-let is dead. But if they just expanded their search, they may think differently. If we look just a bit further north, for example, they're forecasting growth in the East Midlands of 24.6%, Yorkshire of 28.2%, and the Northwest of 29.4%. So while in some regions you're losing in both the short and the long term, we've helped hundreds of investors to achieve 7% rental returns after all their costs, as well as giving them the best chance of some chunky capital growth, juiced up by the sensible use of leverage. It all boils down to getting the location right. So is buy-to-let dead? In some cases, yes. If you're buying in the wrong area, forced into the wrong structure, or expecting instant income without a plan, even the greatest spreadsheet in the world won't make the numbers work. But with the right location, appropriate structure, and a long-term mindset, buy-to-let is very much alive. And if you want to find out not just the areas, but the exact cities that we predict will have the highest growth potential and where we will personally be buying in 2025, then watch this video next.